I think Twitter has a lot of work ahead of it as well. Twitter was very interesting because it was a very abstract concept and not something that people really needed in the world. It was interesting because we had a lot of mainstream awareness around what Twitter was, but we didn't really have relevancy. Why was it valuable to me? Why was it relevant to my life? And we're seeing more and more of that today. But the interesting thing about Twitter is that a lot of people came to it and defined their own relevancy. They defined their own product on top of this utility. And I think the great success in it is that it was treated, because of its simplicity, as a utility that people can build whatever product they wanted on top of it, be it a technological product or be it a social product or a social network or even a social movement, like what you saw in Moldova or in Iran. And I think, for me, there's, in terms of just working and starting companies, it's really more about what you build what you want to see in the world. We built Twitter because I wanted to use it. I wanted to use it every single day. I wanted my friends to use it. I wanted my family to use it. That was the only thing that I cared about. And Square was born out of something similar. My co-founder, Jim, is a glass artist, and he sells these $2,000 pieces of glass. And he sells things that people don't really need. So if he can't take the form of payment that they have in their pocket, then he loses their sale. He loses that money. And for any artist in the world trying to sell something, if they lose that sale, they don't eat. So he had a very specific problem that we tried to solve, and we tried to get him a merchant account. We found that that was a nightmare and full of this wall of ignorance, and we decided that we wanted to make this simpler. And what does it take to make it simpler? So we took a month. I wrote the server software. We hired a guy to write the iPhone program, and Jim made the hardware. And we had a working prototype, and after that month, I started going around to venture capitalists and swiping the black Amexes, and it worked out.
Yeah. So it is a very elegant product, and why don't we catch the audience up with where you are? So I think a lot of us here saw the early videos and demos of what you've done. Really straightforward, like swiping a card through a product and actually being able to pay anywhere. Now you're apparently still in it's a closed beta, right?
We're in a,
Can you talk about what's happened over the last couple of months and where you're going? What are the challenges compared to, say, Twitter?
Twitter had this issue of being so abstract that no one really understood how to use it. Square has this complexity in that the financial world is extremely complex and complicated and heavily defended, and I don't think there's one person that really understands it end to end. And we were in a very fortunate situation when we started Square, which was in February of 2009, in that the market just crashed. And there were all these abstractions that were built upon abstraction, that suddenly were wiped away, and the slate was clean, and the banking institutions that we had to work with and work through to get something like Square going had new management teams. They had people who were looking for more innovation. They were looking for new ways to work and new ways to engage in their payment networks. So it created this opening. It created this very fortunate situation which we took advantage of. So we started work in February of 2009, announced the company in December of 2009, and have been working with a pilot program ever since. And we want to make sure that Square is known for its availability. It's known for its trustworthiness. It's known for its minimization of all the bad things that could potentially happen with a payment network. So we have decided that we wanted to pace the growth out a little bit more and really get a lot of things right. So what we've been doing since that moment in December is we've been bringing more and more people into this quote-unquote pilot, which is effectively a beta, to start processing with cards and start running their businesses and start taking payments over Square. And currently, we are able to produce 10,000 of the free readers that we're giving away to anyone who wants them a day. And we're sending out all the readers to people who have requested them. So we keep fulfilling these readers to everyone who's signed up with Square. and we just keep expanding and expanding and expanding the pilot. It's very similar to what Google did with Gmail. They were in beta for, I think, over 3 years, and everyone loved the beta so much that now the advanced labs, you can add that little beta tag back to the logo.
Now that doesn't sound too limited, right? So 10,000 a day, and you're giving it to whoever calls you up. So I mean, what does that mean practically? Are you getting 10,000 a day, or can you talk about what the numbers are?
We're getting some big numbers. We're not going to talk about the numbers just yet, but we are getting some interesting usage. And the reason we're pacing this out is because Square allows people to get into accepting credit cards right away. Typically, if you want to accept credit cards, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to get started. Now, what this means is we have to sponsor all the people coming in, so we're on the hook for any risk or any fraud that they bring to the system. And in our pilot, we've seen no risk, we've seen no fraud, we've only had 5 chargebacks, and they've all been dismissed. But we want to make sure that as we bring this to millions and millions of people, that we have similar results. So we're really testing the rails to make sure that everything is being looked after, that we have the right limits in place, that people can take the right amounts for their business, and they have everything they need to really run their business. Because we're not at risk of losing 140 characters at this point. We're at risk of losing a sale, and we don't ever want to put our users in that situation. We want every transaction, every sale, and every one of those experiences, both from the merchant standpoint and from the payer standpoint, be it me selling my couch on Craigslist all the way up to me selling clothes in a major retail store, to be magical and to feel great.
Right. So it seems like you're being really methodic about the rollout. And there's a lot of security issues. You talked about how complex this is, all kinds of players in the processing world, and fraud. The security issues certainly significant. Did you learn lessons from Twitter? I mean, if there's one company that caused angst for all of us, it was Twitter, constantly going and seeing the fail whale. And you must have been having a really hard time back in the early days. How did that affect you? And what can the entrepreneurs here? There's 67 companies that are launching or pitching at some point over the next couple of days. What can we learn from the Twitter experience? A company that has an amazing buzz, traction, but had a really hard time in the beginning.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry for all the pain, we're continuing to address some of that pain.
Because you're still chairman, you're very active.
Yes, it's an ongoing thing. Twitter has some interesting scaling issues. Imagine like during halftime or going to the opera, and during intermission, everyone goes to the bathroom, everyone uses the plumbing system at the same time. Suddenly there's this massive spike of activity, and then it goes down to nothing. Twitter has a lot of similar issues with its activity. There's a massive spike around an event, and then it goes back to normal. So engineering for that is very, very difficult. One of the things that I learned that we did fairly poorly in the early days was we were building a company focused around transparency and communication, a communications company to many degrees, but we weren't communicating with our users. We weren't telling them why we were going down. We weren't telling them that we even knew that we were going down. So we weren't bringing them in to share what was happening with the system. And here they were spending hours and hours on the system, helping to create it, helping to define where Twitter goes. And we weren't letting them in the conversation. We weren't allowing them to really know how we were engineering these things and how we were addressing them, if we were addressing them. So that was a big mistake. And when we learned that, and when we realized that what we were doing, we started to have more outreach about what was going on with the system, and we blogged a lot more about the problems and the engineering. It turns out we attracted a lot of engineers that way. We attracted a lot of great people, a lot of great advice. But the biggest thing is it just inspired our users more, engaged our users more, because they knew that they were helping to build this, and they were suddenly into that conversation. The second thing I think faces all companies is not just communication externally, but communication internally. I think we were very poor communicators internally in the beginning. And my biggest fear for any company, Twitter, Square, any company out there, is not necessarily the competition and what they're doing, but it's really being able to cohesively move together as one unit and build one product that everyone is working on, and everyone is has the equal participation in, but really understands why they're building it. And there's really well-defined goals about where it's going and how we're doing, most importantly. And on that last point, one of the other big mistakes we made is that we had no instrumentation at all. We had no analytics, we had no data about what was actually happening with the system. So we were pretty much flying blind. And we didn't take the time to build the systems to watch what was happening with the network and how our users were interacting and you know, the traffic patterns. Once we did, we discovered holes in the system, which we fixed, and then we discovered other holes, which we fixed. And that's something that we did immediately with Square and pushed really hard on, was to make sure that we have instrumentation. Every single thing is logged, so we record everything, so we remember where we were and where we are right now, and we have that momentum. Everything is measured, and everything is well tested. So those three things have helped Square dramatically and allowed us to be a lot more comfortable without having the typical stress of the downtime. And I worry for Square even more for that, because it's such a stressful industry, and you know, we're dealing with actual people's money, and we don't want to make any mistakes there.
You can't be too transparent about that either, right? So scrap the transparent idea, or communication with your users.
Well, the transparent thing is really interesting, because I think the financial world has not been that transparent in the past, has not been that approachable in the past.
Are you a force for transparency?
I believe so. Like I believe the credit card world and the way we've been treating credit cards in the past has been based around a lot of ignorance and a lot of practices, negative practices to incur profit. And I think some of those are coming to the end, some of it out of legislation, some of it out of technology. But I do see Square as a way to bring more transparency to this world and get people in and really understand why the credit card systems cost what they do, and what risk is inherent in credit card systems, and why we're using the technologies that we do. I don't think a lot of people know that, and I've certainly had a great learning experience, you know, learning it for myself so we could build this effectively.
It's interesting you should say you were flying blind on the analytics, and you had issues with transparency at the beginning, because Twitter's always seen as a new media company implementing some of the newer lessons that the super angels run around the valley telling their companies to do, right? So it's a Dave McClure saying, hey, you gotta be measuring your progress, and iteration, launch, test, launch, release again, and test. So basically, a lot of these new companies have implemented that. It's harder to do with Square, right? You're essentially having to, there's not a lot of iteration in that.
Yeah, and it also seems like the most painful thing to do. It just seems like a chore to build these systems, because it's not really the product. But once you build it into the product, and once you consider the instrumentation a product, that's when it gets fun. And with Square, it's fun, because like we have people who are using the iPad and they're putting up their entire inventory in the store, and they're putting up, we have a number of coffee stores all around the country who are putting in cappuccinos, and they're putting in cappuccinos and they're selling them for $2.50, and they're selling them for $3, and they're selling them for $4. Suddenly we have all this rich data around how many cappuccinos are being sold today in the US over Square. And we also have a price. We found out the average price for a cappuccino in the US for people using Square is $2.77. That is fascinating. That's fascinating to have that sort of data. And then to build that into a product that might be usable for our users is even more fascinating. If you go to any coffee store in America that is not Starbucks or Peet's, and you ask them, how many cappuccinos did you sell today? They'll have no idea. No small business, no independent business really has the sense of analytics.